The Middle East has plunged deeper into crisis as Israel intensified its air campaign against Iran, prompting an urgent evacuation warning for hundreds of thousands in Tehran and drawing a stark intervention from U.S. President Donald Trump. The escalating conflict, now on its fourth day, saw dramatic scenes unfold, including an Iranian state television reporter forced to halt a live broadcast as an explosion rocked the capital, underscoring the direct and immediate impact of the hostilities on civilian life and infrastructure. On Monday, June 16, 2025, Israel's military issued an evacuation warning to an estimated 300,000 to 330,000 residents in central Tehran, an area encompassing state TV studios, police headquarters, and 3 major hospitals. This unprecedented directive, reminiscent of prior warnings issued to civilians in Gaza and Lebanon, preceded an Israeli strike on the headquarters of Iran's state-run television. An Iranian reporter on air described the studio filling with dust after the sound of aggression against the homeland before an explosion cut the broadcast, forcing her off camera. The network later confirmed its building was hit by 4 bombs, with some colleagues injured, and transferred live programs to another studio. Iran's ambassador Amir Saeed Iravani swiftly condemned the attack as a blatant war crime and a direct assault on press freedom. Hours after the strike, President Trump posted an ominous message on his social media platform Truth Social, calling for the immediate evacuation of Tehran. He reiterated his long-standing position, declaring Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon. The urgency of the situation prompted Trump to cut short his attendance at the G7 summit in Canada, returning to the White House Situation Room to address the escalating tensions. White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt confirmed his early departure, while Trump himself later dismissed French President Emmanuel Macron's suggestion that he left to work on a ceasefire, asserting his reasons were much bigger than that. He later warned Iran will come down so hard if they do anything to our people, referring to U.S. troops and assets in the region, even as White House spokesperson Alex Pfeiffer maintained that American forces were keeping a defensive posture and had not joined the war. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu asserted that the strikes had set Iran's nuclear program back a very, very long time, claiming the Iranian regime is very weak. Israel maintains its sweeping assault targeting Iran's top military leaders, uranium enrichment sites, and nuclear scientists is crucial to prevent its adversary from developing an atomic weapon. While Iran insists its nuclear program is peaceful, and U.S. assessments have previously noted no organized effort to pursue a nuclear weapon since 2003, the head of the International Atomic Energy Agency IAEA has repeatedly warned that Iran possesses enough enriched uranium for several nuclear bombs. Further compounding these concerns, IAEA Director General Rafael Mariano Grossi warned Monday of potential radiological and chemical contamination at Iran's main Natanz nuclear enrichment facility following Israeli airstrikes, noting severe damage to above-ground electrical facilities, though underground areas remain unverified. In retaliation for Israel's Friday attack, which Israeli officials stated killed at least 224 people, Iran launched over 370 missiles and hundreds of drones at Israel. These retaliatory strikes have killed 24 people and injured over 500 in Israel. Powerful explosions rocked Tel Aviv, with a missile striking near the American consulate, causing minor damage. The central Israeli city of Petah Tikva saw a residential building charred by Iranian missiles, while an oil refinery in northern Haifa was hit for the second consecutive night, killing 3 workers and igniting a significant fire. Israeli military spokesperson Brig General Efi Defrin claimed full aerial superiority over Tehran, stating forces destroyed over 120 surface-to-surface missile launchers, a third of Iran's total, and struck 10 command centers of Iran's Quds force. Iran meanwhile reported 1277 wounded and prepared for what state media termed the largest and most intense missile attack in history on Israeli soil, also accusing Israel of a war crime for striking Farabi Hospital in Kermanshah. Amid the escalating violence, diplomatic overtures, albeit complex, have emerged. Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi appeared to signal a willingness to de-escalate, writing on X, "It takes one phone call from Washington to muzzle someone like Netanyahu," suggesting a path to diplomacy if Trump was genuine about diplomacy. While Trump denied reaching out for peace talks, he did state if they want to talk they know how to reach me, and expressed belief that a deal will be signed. Reports from Axios suggested a potential meeting between U.S. envoy Steve Witkoff and Araghchi this week, with the U.S. reportedly holding its ability to bomb Iran's underground Fordow nuclear facility as a bargaining chip. However, previous negotiations scheduled for the weekend were cancelled by Iran after Israel's initial attack. The conflict has caused widespread disruption, forcing most Middle Eastern countries to close their airspace, stranding tens of thousands of passengers. As the international community grapples with the deepening crisis, other significant global developments involving President Trump unfolded concurrently. During his truncated G7 visit, Trump signed an executive order confirming parts of a UK-US tariff deal. This agreement will reduce tariffs on UK cars shipped to the US to 10% from the previous 25%, a move hailed by UK Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer as a very important day. Mike Hawes, head of the Society of Motor Manufacturers and Traders, called it a huge reassurance for the sector, which had seen fewer exports due to the uncertainty. However, the deal's specifics on steel and aluminum tariffs remain less clear, with the current 25% tax still in place and a potential increase to 50% looming if a broader agreement isn't reached by July 9. The pact also includes a tariff-free quota for U.S. ethanol, raising concerns for UK producers like ABF Sugar, which warned of potential job cuts if not protected. While the UK government highlighted the removal of tariffs on certain aerospace products and an increased quota for US beef imports, it emphasized no weakening of food standards. Despite Trump's description of it as a major trade deal, the agreement is limited in scope and not a full free trade agreement, drawing criticism from UK opposition parties for its perceived inadequacy. The broader implications of the Israel-Iran conflict are profound, with Russia's Vladimir Putin and Turkey's Recep Tayyip Erdogan condemning Israeli actions, expressing most serious concern over the escalation and its long-term consequences for the entire region. Internally, Iran has reportedly detained several individuals and executed one on suspicion of espionage, following Mossad's alleged pre-attack positioning of explosive drones and precision weapons inside the country. As the region teeters on the brink of all-out war, the immediate future hinges on whether diplomatic channels can temper the military escalation, or if the cycle of strikes and counterstrikes will continue to propel the Middle East into even greater upheaval, with potential global ramifications for energy markets, trade, and international relations. In an unusual convergence of high-stakes geopolitics and nascent financial innovation, former President Donald Trump has recently dominated headlines, issuing an urgent evacuation warning for Tehran amid escalating Iran-Israel hostilities, while simultaneously making significant moves to integrate his social media platform Truth Social into the burgeoning cryptocurrency market. These seemingly disparate developments underscore a volatile global landscape and the increasing intertwined nature of political influence and digital finance. The Middle East finds itself on a knife edge, with President Trump's stark directive for everyone in Tehran to immediately evacuate delivered via a Truth Social post on Monday night, June 16, 2025. This alarming message coincided with his abrupt early departure from the G7 summit in Canada, a decision White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt attributed to the intensifying Iran-Israel conflict. "I have to be back early for obvious reasons," Trump told reporters, adding, "This is big stuff." His social media post explicitly stated Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon. "I said it over and over again, and lamented Iran should have signed the deal I told them to sign. What a shame and waste of human life." This statement implicitly refers to his administration's 2018 withdrawal from the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action (JCPOA), a move critics contend contributed to the current regional instability. The evacuation call echoed earlier warnings from Israeli officials and targets an estimated 330,000 people in central Tehran, encompassing critical infrastructure like Iran's state television headquarters, police headquarters, and key hospitals. Iranian authorities, however, have dismissed these warnings as psychological warfare. Despite this, the ground reality is one of profound chaos and displacement. Thousands have been pushed to flee, exacerbating traffic jams in a city ill-equipped with publicly accessible bomb shelters. A significant portion of Tehran's 9.5 million inhabitants have been left in a perilous limbo, with many resorting to seeking refuge in basements or subway stations. Monday marked the fourth day of intense military escalation, which began last Friday with Israeli missile strikes on Iran's nuclear facilities and military leadership. Since then, both nations have engaged in a dangerous exchange of missiles, some even striking an Iranian television news network live on air. The conflict has already claimed a grim toll, with an estimated 224 fatalities in Iran and 24 confirmed deaths in Israel. While world leaders at the G7 summit had intended to prioritize discussions on the expanding conflict and issue a joint statement urging restraint, Trump notably refused to sign the letter. His stance on potential U.S. military involvement remained ambiguous. When pressed, he stated, "I don't want to talk about that," though he had earlier told ABC News that U.S. involvement was possible but not at this moment involved. Amidst this escalating crisis, Iran has reportedly communicated through Arab intermediaries a desire to continue nuclear talks with the U.S. and de-escalate the conflict, as reported by the Wall Street Journal. In a stark contrast to the geopolitical turmoil, Trump's digital ventures are making significant strides in the financial sector. His social media platform, Truth Social, has filed an S-1 form with the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission (SEC) to launch a dual exchange-traded fund ETF for Bitcoin and Ether. Filed on Monday, the Truth Social Bitcoin and Ethereum ETF aims to offer investors exposure to these leading cryptocurrencies without the complexities of direct ownership. Sponsored by Yorkville America Digital and with Forest Dax Trust Company operating as Crypto.com serving as the crypto custodian, the ETF shares are proposed to be listed on the New York Stock Exchange ARCA NYSE ARCA. While the fund's ticker and cash custodian are yet to be disclosed, this move follows the SEC's recent approval of Trump Media and Technology Group's TMTG $2.3 billion Bitcoin treasury deal. Though TMTG has stated no immediate plans to issue securities under that agreement. This foray into the crypto ETF space by a politically charged entity is not an isolated incident but rather indicative of a broader industry trend. The same day Truth Social filed its S1, CoinShares also submitted an S1 for a Solana spot ETF building on its existing European exchange-traded product. This brings the number of Solana spot ETF filings under SEC consideration to at least 8, including major players like Fidelity Investments, 21 Shares, Franklin Templeton, Grayscale Investments, Bitwise Investments, Canary Capital, and VanEck. While a Solana ETF approval is deemed unlikely this week by analysts like Bloomberg's James Seifert, the sheer volume of filings underscores a growing institutional appetite for diverse cryptocurrency exposure through regulated investment vehicles. The confluence of these events paints a complex picture of modern global dynamics. On one hand, the specter of a broader Middle East conflict looms large, fueled by historical grievances and the breakdown of international agreements, demanding urgent diplomatic resolution and raising questions about the role of major powers. On the other, the digital asset landscape continues its relentless march toward mainstream financial integration, with even politically prominent figures and their associated platforms seeking to capitalize on the burgeoning cryptocurrency market. As the world navigates these intertwined challenges, the coming months will reveal the true impact of these developments on both global stability and the future of finance. In a series of rapid-fire developments this week, the Trump administration has continued to assert its distinctive approach to both foreign policy and domestic governance, navigating complex international relationships and challenging long-standing constitutional norms. From a firm stance on Iran to a nuanced trade agreement with the United Kingdom and a contentious move to unilaterally control federal spending, the White House is signaling a clear intent to reshape policy on multiple fronts. On the international stage, President Donald Trump has unequivocally stated he has not reached out to Iran for peace talks, dismissing reports to the contrary as highly fabricated fake news. In a post on Truth Social, the president asserted that Iran should have taken the deal that was on the table, adding a characteristic challenge: "If they want to talk, they know how to reach me." This declaration, made as the president returned early from the G7 summit, underscores a firm non-initiating posture towards Tehran, placing the onus for dialogue squarely on the Iranian side. The statement highlights a continued tension in U.S.-Iran relations, with the administration maintaining a position of strength and perceived advantage, demanding proactive engagement from the other party rather than offering a direct olive branch. Meanwhile, a significant albeit limited trade agreement with the United Kingdom has seen President Trump sign an order confirming parts of a tariff deal agreed last month. This move is set to reduce tariffs on up to 100,000 UK cars shipped to the US from 25% to 10%, a welcome relief for British manufacturers who had faced increased costs. Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer hailed the development from the G7 summit in Canada, calling it a very important day for both nations. The pact also includes the removal of tariffs on certain aerospace products, grants the UK a tariff-free quota of 1.4 billion litres of US ethanol previously subject to a 19% tariff, and scraps a 20% tariff on US beef imports, raising the quota to 13,000 tonnes, though the UK government insists on no weakening of food standards. Mike Hawes, head of the Society of Motor Manufacturers and Traders, described the car tariff reduction as a huge reassurance, noting it provides UK manufacturers something of a competitive edge over European rivals still facing higher tariffs. However, the deal has its complexities and critics. The crucial issue of steel tariffs, currently at 25% for UK imports and temporarily spared from a recent doubling to 50%, remains largely unaddressed, with the US president only stating, "We're gonna let you have that information in a little while." This leaves industries like Tata Steel, which recently shut down its blast furnaces and imports steel, in a precarious position regarding the melted and poured rule for tariff exemptions. Furthermore, the ethanol quota has drawn sharp criticism from ABF Sugar, which owns the UK's largest bioethanol plant, warning of potential redundancies if the British market isn't protected, demanding government support by June 25. UK opposition parties have also voiced concerns, with Conservative leader Kemi Badenoch labeling it a tiny tariff deal and Liberal Democrat Daisy Cooper urging the government to come clean on impact assessments. Crucially, despite President Trump's rhetoric, this is not a full free trade deal, as the US president lacks the authority to sign such agreements without congressional approval, underscoring its limited scope. Domestically, the White House is reportedly exploring a rarely used and legally contested power to unilaterally cut federal spending, setting the stage for a potential high-stakes constitutional clash. President Trump's top aides are signaling a willingness to invoke pocket rescission, a maneuver that would allow them to cancel billions of dollars in inactive funds without explicit congressional approval. Russell T. Vought, the director of the White House Office of Management and Budget (OMB), has openly discussed this strategy, telling lawmakers there are all manner of provisions to cut spending. The plan involves submitting rescission requests closer to the fiscal year's end, September 30th. If Congress fails to vote on the request within 45 days, the funds would effectively freeze and expire. This strategy directly contradicts a 2018 ruling by the Government Accountability Office (GAO), a nonpartisan oversight body which deemed pocket rescission illegal, reversing an earlier stance and citing Supreme Court precedent. Democrats in Congress are already sounding alarms, with Representative Rosa DeLauro and Senator Patty Murray estimating that the White House has already slowed or frozen at least $425 billion in funds approved by Congress, impacting critical areas like cancer research, childcare, and natural disaster recovery. The GAO has launched over 36 investigations into the administration's spending actions, recently ruling that a halt on federal funding for libraries constituted an illegal impoundment, a practice restricted by a 1970s law enacted in response to former President Richard M. Nixon's attempts to block congressional appropriations. Mr. Vought and conservative allies, however, contend that decades of congressional inaction on previous GAO recommendations mean pocket rescission remains consistent with the law, framing it as a viable tool for carrying out the broader political mandate to curb unnecessary spending. These diverse actions paint a consistent picture of an administration determined to assert executive authority and reshape policy through assertive and at times unconventional means. Whether through a firm diplomatic posture that demands concessions, a strategic but limited trade deal designed to benefit specific industries, or a direct challenge to the legislative branch's power of the purse, the Trump White House is demonstrating a willingness to push boundaries. The implications of these decisions are far-reaching, from the trajectory of U.S. foreign relations and the global trade landscape to the fundamental balance of power within the American government. As these policies unfold, they will undoubtedly face continued scrutiny, legal challenges, and shape the political discourse for months to come, setting precedents that could reverberate for years. The global economic landscape finds itself in a precarious and unpredictable state, largely shaped by the assertive trade policies emanating from Washington. As President Donald Trump concluded his recent engagements at the G7 summit in Canada, the world watched closely for signals on the future of international commerce, with a looming July 9 deadline for sweeping new tariffs casting a long shadow over ongoing negotiations and market stability. At the heart of the recent diplomatic flurry was the G7 summit, where trade emerged as a dominant theme. A significant development unfolded with the signing of a limited trade agreement between the United States and the United Kingdom. President Trump and British Prime Minister Keir Starmer formalized a deal previously agreed upon last month, which includes lowering U.S. tariffs on British car and aerospace imports. UK carmakers will benefit from an annual quota of 100,000 vehicles subject to a reduced 10% tariff, less than half the rate other countries face, and tariffs on aerospace goods, including aircraft parts, have been removed. However, the path forward for steel and aluminum tariffs remains less clear, with U.S. officials eyeing a quota-based exemption tied to UK supply chain assurances, as Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick is set to determine quota levels. This agreement, hailed by Trump as a sign of a just fantastic relationship, stands as the sole major trade deal reached during his administration's 90-day pause from steep tariffs announced in early April. Despite the progress, industries like pharmaceuticals were notably excluded, and key provisions such as reciprocal beef and ethanol access await final implementation, with the White House expecting the deal to take effect within a week of Federal Register publication. Frank Stephan-Walliser, CEO of luxury British automaker Bentley, underscored the persistent tariff uncertainty for the brand even with this preliminary agreement. In stark contrast to the Anglo-American Accord, trade talks between the US and Japan at the G7 summit stalled, leaving the Asian nation vulnerable to escalating US tariffs and raising concerns about a potential recession. President Trump, speaking after an early departure from the summit, characterized Japan as being tough in negotiations, adding, "They're tough, the Japanese are tough, but ultimately you have to understand we're just going to send a letter saying this is what you're going to pay." Japanese Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba confirmed the failure to reach an agreement, stating, "There are still some points on which the two sides are not on the same page, so we have not yet reached an agreement on the trade package." Japan had hoped to secure concessions, particularly on auto tariffs, which have significantly impacted its economy and auto companies. The lack of a deal, while potentially showcasing Ishiba's resolve to protect national interests, underscores the deep divisions that persist beyond the G7. The broader global trade landscape remains fraught with tension and uncertainty. The July 9 deadline, dubbed Liberation Day 2.0, looms large, marking the end of the 90-day tariff pause and potentially triggering increased duties. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent indicated that the administration might extend this pause for countries or trading blocs like the European Union that are negotiating in good faith. However, Trump's frustration with the EU is palpable, as he lamented their failure to offer a fair deal, warning, "They're either going to make a good deal or they'll just pay whatever we say they have to pay." Despite the administration's tariffs, the EU's trade surplus with the US has paradoxically expanded each month since January, reaching a total US trade deficit of around $115 billion in April. Reports from German newspaper Handelsblatt suggested the EU was prepared to accept a flat 10% US tariff under certain conditions, hoping to avert higher duties on critical sectors like cars, drugs, and electronics. Meanwhile, trade talks with Canada also remain in focus, with Trump acknowledging different concepts on tariffs with Prime Minister Mark Carney, even as Canada already faces substantial duties on steel, aluminum, and foreign autos. The US-China trade relationship, a perennial flashpoint, has seen mixed signals. While the nations agreed to a framework and implementation plan to ease tariff and trade tensions, particularly concerning rare earth mineral exports, key issues remain unresolved, including export restrictions tied to national security. Trump indicated that the U.S. would impose a total of 55% tariffs on Chinese goods, a figure clarified by White House officials as an aggregation of pre-existing duties rather than new ones. However, the ripple effects are clear. NVIDIA CEO Jensen Huang revealed that U.S. chip curbs on China have forced the company to exclude the Chinese market from its revenue forecasts. Furthermore, an exclusive Reuters report highlighted Foxconn's strategic shift, with nearly all iPhones exported from India between March and May going to the U.S., a stark indication of Apple's efforts to bypass high U.S. tariffs on China-sourced products. China itself reported mixed economic performance in May, with retail sales jumping but factory output slowing due to the tariffs. Other nations from India to South Korea and Thailand are actively engaging in or preparing for negotiations, reflecting the widespread impact of U.S. trade policy. The economic reverberations of these tariff policies are profound and far-reaching. Retailer at Home cited tariffs as a final blow leading to its bankruptcy, with CFO Jeremy Aguilar noting that the volatility of the current tariff environment came at a time when the management team was working to address the company's existing issues. The uncertainty made it difficult for the company to plan key holiday orders, disrupting supply chains. Gary Friedman, CEO of RH, recounted a chaotic and unpredictable quarter due to tariffs, observing that a lot of the ankle-biter businesses, the little online things, they can't raise capital, they're going away. He suggested that larger, more agile companies might ultimately gain market share. Beyond retail, tariffs are impacting everyday life. Smaller amusement parks are bracing for a tough summer as families pull back on spending due to economic uncertainty. The tourism industry warns that foreign visitors are choosing alternative destinations, further dampening economic activity. On a macro level, government revenue from tariffs has soared, with over $92 billion collected since January 1, 2025, and $22 billion in May alone, contributing to an overall effective U.S. tariff rate of 15.6%, the highest since 1937. While this revenue could potentially offset deficit costs from proposed tax cuts, its stability hinges on the continuation of current policies. However, the dollar hit a fresh 2025 low amid rising tariff concerns, and the Bank of Japan's rate hike cycle may have ended prematurely due to the hit to exports. Even J.P. Morgan Chase CEO Jamie Dimon weighed in, suggesting tariffs might make the soft landing a little bit softer rather than causing the ship go down, while also predicting potential rises in inflation and dips in employment. Politically, the economic anxieties fueled by trade policies are becoming a central issue. A recent Quinnipiac University poll revealed widespread voter dissatisfaction with President Trump's handling of the economy and trade, with nearly two-thirds, 65% of respondents rating the economy as not so good or poor, and a majority, 51%, believing it is worsening. This sentiment is already shaping electoral contests, notably in Virginia's gubernatorial race, where Democrat Abigail Spanberger is actively campaigning against the Trump administration's attacks on Virginia jobs and Virginia's economy. The race, which will install the Commonwealth's first female governor, is seen as an early indicator of how voters are responding to Trump's second term, and where political winds are blowing ahead of the 2026 midterms. As the July 9 deadline approaches, the global economy braces for what could be another significant shift in trade policy. The administration's willingness to extend tariff pauses for good faith negotiators offers a glimmer of hope for continued dialogue, but President Trump's consistent "I'm a tariff person" stance and his readiness to impose unilateral levies underscore the volatile environment. The coming weeks will be critical in determining whether bilateral breakthroughs can be replicated, or if the world is destined for a renewed era of escalating trade barriers with profound and lasting implications for businesses, consumers, and geopolitical stability. As the global geopolitical landscape continues its rapid shift, the Trump administration finds itself at a critical juncture, navigating a complex web of international tensions and pressing domestic policy challenges. Recent developments underscore the multifaceted nature of its current agenda. From a delicate high-stakes standoff with Iran to a controversial push for expanded immigration enforcement and the ongoing scrutiny of the president's personal finances, the Middle East remains a focal point of concern, with escalating tensions between Israel and Iran drawing the United States into a perilous strategic dance. Following reports of an attack on Iran, President Donald Trump swiftly took to his social media platform, asserting that the U.S. had no involvement, in issuing a stark warning: "If we are attacked in any way, shape, or form by Iran, the full strength and might of the U.S. armed forces will come down on you at levels never seen before." Yet amidst this bellicose rhetoric, the president also expressed a desire for de-escalation, stating, "However, we can easily get a deal done between Iran and Israel and end this bloody conflict." This dual message highlights the administration's oscillating approach, balancing threats with an underlying aspiration for a negotiated settlement. Indeed, Pentagon Chief Pete Hegseth affirmed on June 17 that President Trump is still aiming for a deal with Iran, even as the U.S. has reportedly moved airborne refueling tankers to Europe and ordered the USS Nimitz carrier group to the Middle East. These deployments, while described by officials as enhancing defensive posture and providing more options, are seen by some experts, like former Pentagon official Daniel Shapiro, as preparations for potential offensive action, particularly targeting Iran's deeply buried Fordow fuel enrichment plant, which would require specialized U.S. munitions like the GBU-57/B massive ordnance penetrator and B-2 stealth bombers. This volatile situation has ignited an intense internal debate within the Republican Party and the administration itself, pitting Republican hawks against mega isolationists. Prominent figures like Vice President J.D. Vance and influential media personalities such as Tucker Carlson have vocally advocated for U.S. restraint, urging against involvement in new overseas wars. Carlson, in a podcast, specifically called out warmongers demanding airstrikes on Iran, prompting a sharp rebuke from President Trump on social media. "Somebody please explain to kooky Tucker Carlson that Iran can never have a nuclear weapon." This schism extends to the Pentagon, where prioritizers like Undersecretary of Defense for Policy Elbridge Colby reportedly seek to reallocate resources away from the Middle East to focus on China, though the department denies any policy disagreements. Conversely, traditional Republicans and senior Pentagon officials, including CENTCOM Gen. Michael Eric Kurilla, have consistently pressed for a more hawkish stance, with Kurilla confirming to the House Armed Services Chair that he has provided the president with a wide range of options to prevent a nuclear-armed Iran. The former Senate Republican leader Mitch McConnell observed on CNN that this internal strife signified kind of a bad week for the isolationists, suggesting a leaning towards interventionist policies. Amidst these strategic preparations and ideological battles, reports also suggest that President Trump is seeking last-minute talks between Iran and his Middle East envoy Steve Witkoff, indicating that diplomatic avenues, however narrow, are still being explored. Domestically, the administration's focus has turned sharply to immigration, with President Trump issuing a directive for a significant expansion of deportation operations. In a social media post on Sunday, June 15, President Trump called for increased efforts to detain and deport illegal aliens in America's largest cities such as Los Angeles, Chicago, and New York, where millions upon millions of illegal aliens reside. He further instructed ICE officers to do all in their power to achieve the very important goal of delivering the single largest mass deportation program in history, linking the presence of undocumented immigrants to a perceived expansion of the Democrat power center and a drain on American jobs and benefits. This aggressive stance, however, was swiftly followed by a notable shift in policy regarding certain industries. The Department of Homeland Security confirmed to ABC News that it has issued new guidance to pause most raids on farms, restaurants, and hotels. A senior ICE official, Tatum King, explicitly communicated this directive via email, stating, "Effective today, please hold on all worksite enforcement investigations/operations on agriculture, including aquaculture and meat packing plants, restaurants, and operating hotels," while clarifying that investigations involving human trafficking, money laundering, drug smuggling into these industries are okay. This pivot comes after President Trump publicly acknowledged the adverse impact his previous deportation policies had on these sectors, suggesting a pragmatic adjustment in response to economic realities and industry pressure, even as the broader deportation goals remain in place. Adding another layer to the administration's profile, recent financial disclosures have shed light on President Trump's considerable earnings in 2024. According to a report released on Friday, June 13, President Trump earned at least $620 million from his various personal businesses. A significant portion of this income, $57 million, came from the crypto firm World Liberty Financial, which is reportedly headed in part by some of his children and where he holds nearly 16 billion governance tokens. Beyond his ventures into the digital asset space, his traditional businesses continue to be highly lucrative. His trademark and licensing businesses operating under CIC Ventures LLC generated $11 million. Including $3 million from his Save America book, $2.8 million from Trump watches, and $2.5 million from Trump sneakers and fragrances. His resorts and golf courses also contributed substantially, with Mar-a-Lago alone bringing in over $50 million in resort-related revenue, and his Doral Golf Club being his most profitable, earning more than $110 million. These disclosures offer a transparent look into the president's ongoing financial interests while in office, highlighting the interplay between his political role and his extensive business empire. As the Trump administration navigates the complexities of a potential military confrontation in the Middle East, recalibrates its domestic immigration enforcement, and continues to manage the public perception of its leader's vast financial holdings, the coming weeks promise to be critical. The internal policy debates the delicate balance between diplomacy and deterrence with Iran. And the practical implications of large-scale immigration policies will undoubtedly shape not only the administration's legacy but also the broader geopolitical and socio-economic landscape. The interplay of these diverse issues underscores the dynamic and often unpredictable nature of the current political environment, leaving observers to anticipate the next developments in this ongoing high-stakes narrative. The geopolitical landscape of the Middle East hangs precariously in the balance this week as the 5-day-old conflict between Israel and Iran intensifies, drawing the United States into a critical decision point. President Donald Trump, making an abrupt early departure from the G7 summit in Alberta, Canada, declared he was working on something much bigger than a mere ceasefire, signaling a potential shift in America's long-standing policy regarding the region's most volatile nuclear standoff. His cryptic remarks underscore the profound dilemma facing Washington, whether to engage directly in a war it has long sought to avoid or to pursue a diplomatic resolution amidst escalating hostilities. The conflict, which began with Israeli strikes on Iranian military infrastructure last Friday, has rapidly spiraled into a deadly exchange of fire. Iran has retaliated with barrages of missiles hitting cities across Israel, including areas near Tel Aviv. The human toll is mounting, with the Iranian Health Ministry reporting at least 224 killed and over 1,400 injured in Iran, while Israel's government confirms 24 fatalities and approximately 600 wounded. Israel has methodically targeted Iran's military chain of command, announcing the killing of Major General Ali Shadmani, described as Iran's most senior military commander, who had only been appointed 4 days prior to replace Lieutenant General Ghulam Ali Rashid, killed on the first day of hostilities. This tactic, mirroring past Israeli operations against groups like Hezbollah, has reportedly decimated Iran's senior military leadership, with at least 11 generals killed. On Monday, an Israeli strike even hit the headquarters of Iran's state broadcaster in Tehran during a live broadcast, an act Israel claimed targeted a communication center used by the military. At the heart of the U.S. dilemma lies Iran's deeply buried Fordo nuclear enrichment facility, which experts contend can only be effectively destroyed by the massive ordnance penetrator GBU-57, a 30,000-pound bunker buster bomb carried solely by American B-2 stealth bombers. Israel, despite its formidable military capabilities and having damaged other major nuclear sites, lacks the means to neutralize Fordo. This technical reality places immense pressure on President Trump. who has consistently vowed to avoid new foreign wars yet faces a steadfast Israeli insistence on dismantling Iran's nuclear program, which Jerusalem views as an existential threat. Former Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant, in a stark appeal, stated on CNN that the job has to be done by Israel by the United States, directly alluding to the need for American firepower. Senator Lindsey Graham echoed this sentiment, urging Trump to go all in if diplomacy fails, even if it means flying with Israel. Yet Trump's stance remains complex and seemingly contradictory. While on Air Force One, he declared he was seeking a real end, not a ceasefire, demanding a complete give-up from Iran on its nuclear ambitions. Simultaneously, he has encouraged his Mideast envoy Steve Witkoff and Vice President J.D. Vance to explore a resumption of talks with Iranian officials, with Iran's foreign minister Abbas Araghchi signaling openness to such discussions. However, Trump's public call for Tehran residents to immediately evacuate and his assertion that he's not too much in the mood to negotiate complicate any diplomatic overture. The deployment of U.S. aircraft and additional defensive capabilities to the Middle East further highlights the volatile tightrope Washington is walking, aiming to protect American interests without explicitly joining the conflict. The regional ramifications of this escalating conflict are profound and immediately felt. Syria's new government, led by President Ahmed al-Shara, has conspicuously remained silent amidst the chorus of Arab condemnations against Israeli strikes. This silence marks a significant geopolitical shift, signaling Syria's deliberate distancing from its former close ally Iran and its network of anti-Israel militias. Analysts like Ibrahim al-Assal of the Middle East Institute view Syria's current stance as a clear signal to Israel and the United States that its territory will no longer be used for attacks against Israel, a move aimed at garnering Western support and born out of deep-seated resentment towards Iran's role in its civil war. This openness has even led to direct talks between Syrian and Israeli officials on security matters, a remarkable development for two historically adversarial nations. However, Sanam Vakil of Chatham House warns that a weakened Iran could also give Israel more leverage to pressure Syria into normalizing relations, potentially at Syria's disadvantage. Meanwhile, in the Israeli-occupied West Bank, Palestinian communities find themselves caught in the crossfire. As Israeli interceptors clash with Iranian missiles, debris has rained down on Palestinian homes, injuring civilians and exacerbating an already precarious existence. Unlike Israeli settlements with their bomb shelters and air raid sirens, Palestinian neighborhoods often lack any form of protection or official guidance. Nail al-Azza, a spokesman for Palestinian emergency services, reported roughly 80 pieces of shrapnel hitting Palestinian communities, injuring 7 people. Ala Jaradat, a construction worker whose home was damaged, lamented the lack of government support, while Ahmed Jibril of the Palestinian Red Crescent highlighted how Israeli checkpoints impede ambulance access to the injured. This dire situation has fueled frustration with both the Israeli occupation and the Palestinian Authority, leaving residents like Mahmoud Abdul Omar in Daraa, Syria, fearing their country could be dragged into another war after just emerging from its own civil conflict. Internationally, the crisis is sending ripples across the globe. China has begun evacuating its nationals from both Israel and Iran, with its foreign ministry spokesman Wei Jiaquan urging both belligerents to ensure the safety of Chinese citizens. Russia and Turkey have condemned Israeli military actions, highlighting the widespread concern over regional stability. The International Atomic Energy Agency IAEA has warned of potential radiological and chemical contamination at Iran's Natanz nuclear facility following Israeli strikes, underscoring the broader environmental and humanitarian risks. As President Trump returns to Washington, the immediate future of the Middle East hangs precariously. The G7 leaders, though calling for de-escalation, remain divided on a unified response, with European nations pushing for diplomacy while the US grapples with its military options. The coming days will be critical in determining whether the high-stakes gamble of coercive diplomacy can succeed in defusing the conflict and bringing Iran to a complete give-up on its nuclear program, or if the United States will be drawn into a direct military confrontation, irrevocably reshaping the geopolitical landscape of the Middle East and beyond. The world watches holding its breath as the decision of whether this is Israel's war or America's unfolds.